It's Jover. I mean, not like officially yet, but we could look ahead a little. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Lombardi Time Brews, where I'm your host, John Delray. As I announced yesterday on the live Q&A, today I was going to put out a bonus episode looking at candidates for the 2024 defensive coordinator position for the Green Bay Packers. Yes, if you tuned into Bleacher Report just a couple days ago, on Tuesday, I believe it was actually, you heard me say much of the same things. However, I did throw in some additional stuff here just for the channel. A few more candidates, a few more tidbits for you. Look, okay, I'm not going to expound into any other real topics we're here to talk about. Predominantly one thing. Why is Joe Barry out? And then who can replace him? Is it a sure thing yet that Joe Barry is out? No, but he really, really should be. And the reasons are many. And frankly, if Joe Barry isn't out, then we might have to have some real conversations about Matt LaFleur, because he seemingly has done the impossible. The Packers fan base is united. We stand together on this front at this point, saying that Joe Barry's got to go. And if Matt LaFleur bucks that, yikes. So let's look in very quickly a few numbers as to why the defense is in the position that it is, or at least numbers reflecting the position that it's in. First, let's take a look here. Steve Palazzolo from PFF. He says QBs with their highest PFF grade of the season coming against the Packers: Justin Herbert, Baker Mayfield, Bryce Young, Kirk Cousins, and Tommy DeVito. Look, you go through a 17-game season, you expect a couple of anomalies, couple little here or there's, right? Couple, like 2 games, you're just off, right? You expect maybe Justin Herbert's going to light you up. Even they've had great success against Baker Mayfield, but hey, he's capable of good games at least. Or how about Kirk Cousins? Sure. But Bryce Young, who struggled against everyone to this point, or Tommy DeVito, the Linsanity comp who recently was benched? No, it's just straight up not okay. Not to mention the fact that, 3 of those are the last 3 weeks alone, but it doesn't stop there. Let's take a look at another one. Aaron Schatz, really one of the masterminds behind DVOA. He says, over the last 6 weeks, the Packers are the number 4 offense in DVOA. Hey, the offense is doing its job behind only San Francisco, the Rams, and Baltimore. They are the number 30 defense in DVOA, ahead of Arizona and Washington, which is the same as their ranking for the whole year. They're 31st against the pass since week 11. He also put in a follow-up tweet that if you took away the Rams game where the Packers defense was going against Brett Rippon, they're last on the year. Woof! Like, they're not giving up that many yards through the air. They're still a top 10 team in yards, but it's the way that they're getting eviscerated. It's so routine. And the thing is, everyone wants to clamor on, it's just because of the zone. It's just because of the zone. No, it's not. At least it wasn't against Carolina. Here's Rob Demoski from ESPN saying that they blitzed on a season-high 44% of dropbacks against Bryce Young. He was 3 of 10 in the first 3 quarters against it, 4 of 6 with 2 touchdowns in the fourth. Went man coverage on a season-high 64% of Bryce Young's dropbacks. Young was 8 of 15 for 98 yards versus man in the first 3 quarters. Not terrible. But then 7 of 9 for 90 yards, 2 touchdowns in the fourth. And to me, that isn't the discussion of zone versus man. That's the discussion of you're doing one thing for 3 quarters, and it seemingly is having some success. But by quarter number 4, the offense has adapted. You don't adapt back. And that's been one of the main things plaguing the Packers defense for 3 years. They've had their moments. They've had, great performances on an individual level. But the lack of adjustments, the lack of situational football is quite problematic for the Packers. So we're all in agreement. It's time to go on. It's time to move on from Joe Barry. But that does raise a few questions. If the Packers are going to move on, what do they need to look for in the next defensive coordinator? And I really thought of 3 traits besides the obvious, right? You got to have a guy who, is high ranking in a defensive staff, has had success, et cetera, et cetera. But I think there's 3 traits outside of that the Packers truly have to look for. Here's number 1. an individual capable of doing the job without interference from Matt LaFleur, quite possibly someone who's done the job before. Look, we've seen it before. A lot of young offensive head coaches get hired and then have a very established defensive coordinator. The Packers attempted to do that with LaFleur and then hanging on to Pettine before it really fell apart. And realistically, I know some may think that this is a sign of weakness for LaFleur. I'm not sure I agree, because you can have a very strong, a very established defensive coordinator with a fairly young offensive coach. I don't know as if that's necessarily an indictment of the coach. Look at Andy Reid in Kansas City with Steve Spagnuolo as his defensive coordinator. I mean, Spags is pretty high, well regarded, used to be a head coach himself. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. And I think LaFleur is in a position right now where he is very, very good at coaching the offense. He has developed this young offense. I've become a fan of his game planning, even over the course of the last month. It's okay to say that he can have someone independent on the defensive side of the ball if that's not his area of expertise. Number two, an individual strong enough to have a standing in the front office. See, this kind of goes with number one. I'm not entirely convinced that Matt LaFleur truly knows what kind of defense he wants. A few years ago, it was clear as day. He wanted the Fangio system. And at the time, the Fangio system was kind of the hot thing in the NFL. Now it's kind of fallen off a little bit, except for a couple defensive coordinators, one of which we're going to talk about in just a little bit. But the thing is, too, with the defensive coordinator spot, how often in the last 3 years have they signed someone, drafted someone, and we immediately said, well, that's a Joe Barry guy. That fits in with the Joe Barry defense. That fits the star position, or that fits something that Joe Barry wants to do. Like, never. At least I can't recall saying that very much. And yet you look at his counterpart on the special team side of things, and Rich Bisaccia is his own problem, but yet his fingerprints are all over the roster. We say that all the time. This guy's on the roster because it's a Rich Bisaccia guy. He's getting stats because that's a Rich Bisaccia guy. We say that all the time. But yet we never seem to say that about the defense. And I think that there is this just apparent disconnect between the front office that wants to do things one way on the defensive side of the ball and then a coaching staff that wants to do it a different way. And yet somehow you have LaFleur in the middle going, that'll work. And then it doesn't work. So they need someone who can stand on their own 2 feet, much like Bisaccia did, and get players in that actually are going to fit their scheme. And then number 3, this is maybe a personal preference of mine, but I think the Packers could really use it. Let's get some edge in the locker room. An aggressive downhill attacker who actually wants to play on toes as opposed to heels, who doesn't want to play bend but don't break, because it doesn't match with the all gas, no break mentality. It doesn't match with having this young offense. Have a defense that's going to get after somebody as opposed to allowing for long drives. So let's take a look at the candidates. I've got them bunched in a whole bunch of different groupings. This first grouping is guys who have been NFL defensive coordinators before. One contingency that I'm going to add on here super quick. I am not putting on this list anyone who is currently employed as a defensive coordinator without good reason. So I didn't put on Patrick Graham from the Raiders. I didn't even put on Antonio Pierce because, frankly, I think they're going to get the job. I don't think the Raiders are going to mess that up again. They've got an interim that they like. I think they're going to stick with that. So I didn't put either of them on. I also didn't put on someone like Nielsen from Atlanta, even though he interviewed for the job in 2021, because he's employed as a defensive coordinator. It's not a promotion for him to jump ship to Green Bay. And frankly, I'm not sure Arthur Smith's going to go anywhere. Same with Mike Tomlin, Bill Belichick, etc. Okay. I made 2 semi-exceptions to the rule that I'll explain. And one of them happens to be number 1, Ejiro Evero. Look, yeah, I know. Yeah, right? He's a defensive coordinator right now. But the possibility remains, because he's under an interim coach, that they're just going to clean house. 3 years ago, he was a finalist for the Packers coordinator job before being passed over for Joe Barry. And since then, he's gone on to be the Broncos defensive coordinator when they had one of the best defenses in the NFL last year, and then the Panthers defensive coordinator this year. And they're quickly improving on the defensive side of the ball. It's shown that no matter where he goes, he's improving the defense that he's in charge of. We know that Matt LaFleur and Evero think very highly of each other. There's a number of quotes out there that show that they think very highly of each other. There's them jogging next to each other on the field last Sunday, laughing with each other. We know that these 2 individuals are close and could possibly work together. If Carolina decides to clean house, then Evero, I think, is a distinct possibility. Number 2, I don't even want to say polarizing, perhaps one of the more negative ones on here, but Brandon Staley. Look, he was a wonderkid for a reason. And he's probably looking to reestablish himself and his resume as a defensive coordinator somewhere after being fired as head coach of the Los Angeles Chargers. LaFleur and he, they know each other. And yeah, the Chargers defense toward the end of his tenure was abysmal. Almost as bad as what's been going on in Green Bay. And he does run the same defense as Joe Barry. But he also has reached a higher peak as a defensive coordinator of the Rams. The Chargers defense has reached a higher peak than the Packers have over the last 3 years. So would I necessarily love this one? No, but he was a wonderkind for a reason. And frankly, it would be quite negligent not to include him on this list of candidates because whether we like it or not, he probably will be a candidate. Number 3, Marvin Manuel. He spent the last 2 years as a defensive backs and safeties coach for the New York Jets. Prior to that, he spent 1 year as a defensive back coach with the Eagles after serving as the defensive coordinator for 2 years with the Atlanta Falcons in 2017 and 2018. And frankly, if you really dive into the Atlanta side of things, a lot of people considered him a scapegoat in 2018 by head coach Dan Quinn because it was a defense that was just maligned with injuries. Most of their key contributors were out for at least multiple games that year, if not the entire season. But yet, looking at his first season as defensive coordinator in 2017, he had the Falcons realizing achievements that defense hasn't seen in a generation. They were top 10 in red zone, rushing, scoring, and total defense in 2017. He was once considered a guaranteed head coaching candidate before things really fell apart for him in that injury-ravaged 2018. And he worked with the Eagles and now the Jets. The man's been in charge of some awfully good secondaries over the last few years. Perhaps he's looking to become an up-and-comer again, and Green Bay, looking for a quick turnaround on the defensive side of the ball, could be the right situation. Next, let's take a look at Joe Cullen. You want to improve the defensive line play? Look no further than Cullen. The current Kansas City Chiefs defensive line coach is widely known in the NFL for quick and aggressive turnarounds. He spent 5 years in Baltimore as the defensive line coach, overseeing Calais Campbell, Matt Judon, Terrell Suggs. And more recently with the Chiefs, he's been instrumental in developing Frank Clark, Caleb Saunders, and maintaining Chris Jones as the defense for the Chiefs has transformed into one of the best in the league. And he has been a coordinator once before, for 1 year, under Urban Meyer. Yep, I know you might have a bad taste in your mouth now with Urban Meyer, but I get it. At the same time, according to the Chiefs website, Cullen, when he was in charge of that defense, led to improvements in almost every single major category, including yards per game, points per game, yards allowed per carry, and passing yards per game, while nearly doubling Jacksonville's sack total over the previous year. He wasn't retained in Jacksonville when Doug Peterson was hired and brought in his own people. But there really isn't a lot of denying that Cullen did do some quality stuff in Jacksonville, even in amongst the turmoil that was Urban Meyer. Next up on the list, let's go Mike Zimmer. 67 years old, former head coach of a division rival. My goodness, I'm sorry. And he's ready to come back to coaching. He's been revered as a defensive mastermind in the NFL for quite literally 30 years. He was the head coach of Minnesota for 8 years. 5 of those, he had Minnesota as a top 10 defense. Prior to that, in Cincinnati, he was the defensive coordinator for 6 years, where he won the Assistant Coach of the Year award in 2009. And only his second year as coordinator there, because he quickly turned around the defense and made them a top 5 unit in that year. If he's ready to come back to being just a coordinator, if he's not looking for a head coaching gig, if he just wants to come back and coach some defense, and he and Matt LaFleur don't completely hate each other, because remember that frosty handshake a few years ago? If they don't totally hate each other, and LaFleur is looking for someone strong to lead a defense who's done it before, Mike Zimmer might be the guy. Keep in mind, though, that a switch to Zimmer would almost assuredly mean a switch to a 4-3 defense. That seems to really be Zimmer's wheelhouse. Not that that's really even a problem for the Packers personnel, but just something to bear in mind. Next up, Larry Foote. Now you may be thinking, I said that I wasn't going to include currently employed defensive coordinators. Well, Larry Foote is a co-defensive coordinator for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Moving to sole defensive coordinator would still ultimately result in a promotion for him. He played for the Steelers from 2002 to 2008, and then kind of became a journeyman over the next few years, playing in Detroit, amongst other places. But since retiring and becoming a coach, he's quickly moved up the ranks. He spent 4 years in Arizona coaching linebackers before joining Todd Bowles in Tampa Bay to coach outside linebackers from 2019 to 2021, which just happened to coincide with Shaq Barrett's most productive years as an edge rusher. Then for 2022, he kicked it inside, became the inside linebackers coach, coaching Levante David and Devin White, where both of them posted 100-plus tackle seasons last year. Then coming into this year, was promoted to co-defensive coordinator, passing side of things, this year. He's knowledgeable and trained in both 4-3 and 3-4 systems, and would bring a very hard-nosed, no BS approach to the defense. Again, maybe something they could use. And then the last one. This is the other pseudo exception, if you will. Sean Desai. Yeah, I know I'm kind of making an exception here. Right now, he is the defensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles. It's true, but they've also had some murky outcomes there as of late. They recently took away his play calling duties, gave them to Matt Patricia in an effort to shake things up. So if Desai is truly on the outs there, if he's going to be unemployed, then this does make a lot of sense. And I felt like there was enough smoke there to maybe make this one happen. So I will say, before this year, Desai was a very quick riser. He spent some time in college and then doing quality control for the Bears. But then really once elevated to being a position coach, his ascent has been fast. In 2019, he was made the Bears safeties coach, which just happened to be when Eddie Jackson made a Pro Bowl. In 2021, he was promoted to being the Bears defensive coordinator. Then the next year, jumped ship to the Seahawks to be the associate head coach defense, because that's how the Seahawks name things, before becoming Philadelphia's defensive coordinator this year. Both full seasons that he's been a coordinator, meaning last year in Seattle and the year before with the Bears, his units ranked in the top 10 in sacks. Last year, heading up the Seahawks, they were also 8th in takeaways as well. Is he a perfect candidate? No, not necessarily, but the man was a fast riser for a reason and certainly has a reputation of being in charge of quality defenses. Now, the next category of people. Let's take a look at non-coordinators, guys who haven't been coordinators in the NFL before. And let's take a look first at Jim Leonhard. No, never been a coordinator in the NFL before, but he has collegiately, and he did interview for the Philadelphia Eagles defensive coordinator job not too long ago. And much has already been written. I don't know if you spent a time on this because like the connections between Jim Leonhard and the Packers are very, very much out there for the former Badger. And we do know that in 2021, or a couple years ago, when the job eventually went to Joe Barry, Matt LaFleur originally offered the job to Jim Leonhard. And it's believed that he turned it down because he thought he was a shoo-in for the Wisconsin Badgers head coaching job, which didn't exactly go Leonhard's way. So now he's a defensive assistant at the University of Illinois. In other words, the man's available for hire. I understand that he may be polarizing. I've seen a lot of calls online from Packer fans saying that he's definitely the guy for the job. Look at what he did with the Badgers. Look at how he was revered as a coach on the field throughout almost his entire NFL career after being a UDFA and then making rosters. He's that kind of guy. He's Wisconsin through and through. And then I've also seen a whole bunch of calls of like, yeah, but that's just home bias. Why is no one else clamoring after him? Why didn't he get the Philadelphia job if he's such a wonderkind, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Look, there's no denying that when he was defensive coordinator at Madison for the Wisconsin Badgers, they were one of the best defenses in college football year in and year out. He would bring, it's still a zone-based scheme. He runs basically the Petten school of thought there if you're looking for a comp. But it still would be a more aggressive style of D than what they currently have. Moving on next to another guy who's never been a coordinator before. Let's take a look at Al Harris. Yeah, I know people were waiting for this one. He's known for one of the most iconic playoff moments in Green Bay Packer history. He's currently the defensive backs coach in Dallas under Mike McCarthy. And he's been involved in coaching secondary since 2013. And he's really kind of established his brand as a aggressive coach. by coaching Trevon Diggs, and then this year, Deron Bland, as Diggs has been out. Harris knows how to coach playmaking from defensive backs. There's no doubt about it. Green Bay could use more of it. What are the concerns here? The fact that he's not even a pass game coordinator, or he's not even in charge of the secondary by himself. Is he really ready to make the ascension all the way to defensive coordinator? I'll let you be the judge of that. But one thing is true. Throughout his tenure of coaching secondaries, he's had playmakers all over the field. Maybe a coincidence, maybe not. But I will say this. If we're going to seriously consider Al Harris, then we probably better consider his boss, and that's Joe Witt Jr. Because Joe Witt Jr., the longtime Mike McCarthy assistant, Joe Witt was here in Green Bay for an awfully long time with McCarthy. Those two are very, very close. Well, he's the secondary and defensive passing game coordinator in Dallas right now. And when it comes to Witt, it's actually pretty easy to see a track record of success in coaching coordinators. Keep in mind, too, that when he was back here in Green Bay, people were saying then that maybe he would ascend to being a coordinator. It just never really happened for him. In 2019, he was the pass game coordinator in Cleveland. He just happened to finish top 10 in interception and passing yards per game that year. Most recently in Dallas, Witt has worked with Al Harris to oversee one of the most productive secondaries, one of the secondaries that leads the league in takeaways annually in football in spite of injuries. And keep in mind, he was in Green Bay for 10 years. He was here for the Super Bowl. He was instrumental in the development of Sam Shields and Tramon Williams. Former Packers have spoken so highly about Witt for so long. Over his years in Green Bay, the Green Bay Packers led the NFL in interceptions and ranked 9th in opponent passer rating. If Joe Witt, if there's really anyone on this list who's never been a coordinator before, who's got the resume to do it, Joe Witt might just be the guy. Next up, let's take a look from Miami, Anthony Campanelli. He's one of the more well-rounded coaches on the list. And why I say that is because this guy is a coach through and through. He didn't have some NFL playing career that then, he retired and became a coach. No, the dude's just a coach. He started all the way back at his hometown high school in 2006 and then quickly rose up all the way to the NFL. Like I mentioned, he's currently the linebackers coach for the Miami Dolphins. But that's not all he does. He's coached several different positions on the field, including, at the very least collegiately, tight ends, wide receivers, D-backs, linebackers, and he was a college defensive coordinator at Boston College. What maybe has kind of given him this star turn? I mean, Miami is a very good defense this year, including against the run. They're one of the best at stopping the run this year. In fact, last year even, they were top 4 in run defense. But what really kind of has caught a lot of attention lately is he's been featured on Hard Knocks. If you haven't seen the speech, I would encourage you to go look it up, where he talks about the aggression and violence necessary to play defense. You don't hear those things coming from Green Bay all that often. In Green Bay, they talk about it being a mindset, which, is kind of true, but Campanelli seems to be from the Dan Campbell school of thought that says, let's just go punch him in the mouth. Green Bay might be able to use a little bit of that. And what I really like about Campanelli is that well-rounded nature, the fact that this guy isn't just a coach of a secondary. He's not just been a linebackers coach. Man's done it all. He should see the game through and through. Next up, Chris Hewitt, pass game coordinator and secondary coach for the Baltimore Ravens. This is a quote directly from the Baltimore Ravens site. With Hewitt at the helm of the secondary since 2015, the dude's been their secondary coach since 2015. Baltimore's defense has ranked at or near the top of the NFL in several categories, including points allowed per game, second at 20, yards allowed per game, first at 324.7, and third down conversion percentage, second at only 35.9. The secondary has also contributed to the NFL's 6th-ranked opponent completion percentage of 62.3 and the 6th best opponent passer rating of 86.7. I thought maybe, look, Hewitt's been basically the same job. Yes, he's been elevated to defensive pass game coordinator, but ultimately the guy's been doing predominantly the same job since 2015. And there hasn't been a ton of talk about him being a coordinator, going on all these interviews, anything. And so I thought for sure when I started looking into Hewitt that maybe this is a guy who has publicly said, I'm just in Baltimore. I'm going to be in Baltimore forever. This is my home. I love it here. I'm not going anywhere. Nope. I couldn't find it at the very least. So by all accounts, this is a guy who would take a defensive coordinator position. Look at the way that Baltimore plays defense. And it's been regardless of who their coordinators have been, whether it was back with Wink Martindale or now with Mike McDonald, they play a very varied style of defense. Lots of different formations, lots of different disguises, while being hyper aggressive. I talked yesterday on the live Q&A about how Green Bay is one of the most predictable defenses in the NFL. It also doesn't adjust during games. Baltimore is the polar opposite. Maybe what Green Bay could use is just a dash of polar opposite. So there you have it. Those are my candidates for the Green Bay Packers defensive coordinator position for 2024. Might it be someone not on this list? Yeah, there's hundreds of candidates to choose from. Maybe Matt LaFleur is going to want someone his age or younger. Maybe Matt LaFleur is going to want someone like Mike Zimmer, who's 67 years old. Maybe they give even Rex Ryan a call, even though I was a little apprehensive to put him on the list. Maybe I should have. But there are names out there that I did not cover that absolutely might be candidates for the job. However, I would argue that whoever it is that comes in better have at least one of the three traits that I listed earlier. Because if Jordan Love looks as special as he has over this last stretch of time, if he looks like he could really be the guy, then let's not do a whole nother career arc of a defense that just lets him down. Let's actually strive for a defense that can win some games instead of just not breaking and then breaks anyway. Thanks so much for checking out Lombardi Time Brews. I'll be back tomorrow with the game preview for Packers versus Vikings, and then a special New Year's Eve watch party coming Sunday night. Me and Claudia will be here watching the whole game for Packers versus Vikings with all of you. Thanks so much for being here today. I do hope you are having an absolutely fantastic week. And as always, go Pack Go.